I hope everyone had a very, very happy Thanksgiving and certainly a safe one. We have a truly special program for you this morning, and I can see by the participation that everyone is extremely eager to participate. Probably most of you have seen the cover of Henry Nichols that's been advertised around the building for quite some time. So the program this morning is indeed very, very special. We're here today to become more aware of what AIDS is, and especially here at the FBI, how it affects all of us in the workplace. We have some special guests with us today from the Center for Disease Control, the National Coalition of AIDS, the American Red Cross, the Whitman Walker Clinic, the George Washington University, the American Federation of Teachers, and the Mercy Medical Airlift. Will the representatives from these organizations please stand? Thank you all very much. At this point, I would like to introduce the Deputy Director of the FBI, Mr. Floyd Clark.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome all of you here this morning. This is the FBI's first annual participation in the AIDS Awareness Program. Director Sessions is out of the country, or he would be here with us, and he brings his personal support and concern about this terrible disease and the need to find a cure for it. And we're particularly honored today to have Henry Nichols with us. And in spite of the fact that he has been infected with this deadly disease, that he has set out to achieve goals and personal challenges of his own. And I'm sure that most of you have seen the magazine article and know that he has achieved one of those objectives, and that he has attained the highest level in scouting, the rank of Eagle. And that is a tremendous accomplishment for anybody, let alone someone that has had to overcome the kinds of problems that he has. So we are particularly honored to have him, and I bring Director Sessions' best wishes to him and to all of you, and it's a privilege for me to be here with you also this morning. Thank you.
Before I introduce Henry's sister, I would just like to recognize a couple of other individuals who are here with Henry today. I would like to introduce Mr. Todd Curtis, Jennifer's husband. And Mr. Dana Swift, a close personal friend of Henry's. And at this time, I would like to introduce Henry's sister, Jennifer Curtis Nichols.
Hello. We've had a great morning. We've been out on the shooting range and done all the typical FBI things, and it's really wonderful to be here. Before I bring Henry in to talk to you about AIDS, though, I'd like just a minute to talk to you about Henry. Henry is an 18-year-old hemophiliac who's been infected with the virus that causes AIDS for over 8 years now. Since we went public with his diagnosis in March, things have gotten kind of crazy. Henry, as you've all seen, has been on the cover of Parade magazine, in People magazine, on the Good Morning America and the Today Show. Tomorrow we're flying out to New York to do Sally Jesse Raphael. But before you get the idea that having AIDS is all jet-setting around the country, meeting exciting people, and doing things like this, there's been a bad side to this. Henry was on AZT, and we found out that that doesn't work for him. Then he was on an experimental drug called DDI, and again, we found out that that didn't work for Henry. Then he got pneumonia, and a series of drug reactions that kept him pretty sick for a lot of the summer. Most recently, we had him down in Washington, D.C., here at NIH, for an experimental drug protocol that put him in the hospital for a week. We'll find out in a couple of months how that worked. 2 weeks ago, we were in San Diego, and Henry got a staph infection. In 6 hours in the hospital, he managed to run up a $30,000 medical bill. Right now, we've got him on special antibiotics that will hopefully keep him from getting any other infections, but the doctors aren't making any promises at this point. This is a difficult time for Henry. Right now, most people his age are in college. They're planning out their lives and their futures. An awful lot of people with Henry's medical condition are in hospitals, coming to the end of their lives. Henry's decided to take a year off of college, to travel all around the country, to speak to people, to convince them that this is something they need to be aware of, to hope that what has happened to our family won't happen to yours. And now I'd like to introduce my brother, Henry Nichols. Has anyone seen Henry? How many of you know what someone with AIDS looks like? Could everyone who's 16 to 25 stand up? Okay, you can be seated. Well, I have some bad news for you. The fastest growing HIV risk group in the country right now looks exactly like you. Henry?
Now, the reason why we did that is we wanted to make a point. And that point is a government study shows that around half the people my age don't believe you can get AIDS from someone who looks healthy. Any of you who did not know me could not have guessed that I have AIDS, and you can't tell by looking. As of today, more than 118,000 people have died of AIDS. As of today, there have been over 180,000 cases of AIDS, and there are more than 2 million people in this country who are infected with the virus, but who do not yet have AIDS. My age group, 16 to 25, is the fastest growing AIDS risk group there is. When I was born in 1973, my parents did not know that my body lacked the ability to produce a certain protein called factor VIII. Factor VIII is required in the clotting process to stop bleeding. I was diagnosed as having a bleeding disorder called hemophilia at the age of 18 months, and it was not a major problem. The missing protein in my blood could be replaced by using a donated concentrated clotting factor. This donated factor VIII was made from the pooled blood of thousands of donors. Each of the more than 300 times that I suffered from a bleeding episode, it was necessary for me to receive an intravenous infusion of this missing protein. These infusions are not hard to do and they only hurt a little bit. The real pain of hemophilia comes from the cost to treat it. A severe hemophiliac can cost anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 per month to treat. There are over 20,000 hemophiliacs in this country. I have been infused in emergency rooms of hospitals, in cars where we're going on trips, on the side of Mount Marcy, the highest mountain in the Adirondacks, on the front lawn of our house after I lost a bike race with a car, and crossing the Colorado River on our way to the North Rim in the Grand Canyon. And I have the world's record for the strangest places for infusions. Infusions were a real family affair, and everyone learned how to infuse me until I was old enough to infuse myself. We never went anywhere without my infusion kit, because any time I twisted my knee or bumped my leg, I could need an infusion. These injuries were not serious, but if they went untreated, I'd have joint problems when I was older and would not be able to walk. I used to drive my family crazy, because like a lot of other hemophiliacs, I wanted to be just like anyone else. Only there were some things I wasn't allowed to do. Baseball was out. Any head injury is life-threatening to a hemophiliac. Soccer, football, and basketball weren't allowed either because my knees could not take the strain of running. So I learned to climb trees. I always climbed the highest one. I learned to rock climb and backpack and canoe. Sometimes I would need to be infused, but most of the time I could do anything my friends could. Today, we are able to screen blood to determine if the donor may have been exposed to the AIDS virus. In the early 1980s, we could not. Unfortunately for myself and for many others, we were unknowingly exposed to AIDS before AIDS was even a word. As nearly as we can tell, I'd probably been exposed to the AIDS virus when I was around 11 years old. After I was exposed, nothing happened for several years. The virus seems to go through a dormant or quiet period during which the victim appears healthy and doesn't know that he's getting ill. Gradually, your immune system weakens, then you can get an opportunistic infection, and then you have AIDS. It takes the average person 6 to 10 years from the time they are infected until they develop AIDS. The whole time, you are apparently healthy and can infect others. I'm going to take a break from my speaking to show you some slides about me and my life and help you pretty much just get to know me and AIDS patients a little bit better. So if somebody could dim the lights or kill the lights altogether. Well, this is embarrassing. It's not me, really. Aha. This is me and my father. I'm the cute one with the 2 black eyes. Well, all right, for this one, when I was little, you have to understand I was quite stubborn. And one day I got into an argument with this car. Actually, it wasn't really an argument, it was more of a battle. This was my weapon. This is me and my bike after the battle. As you can see, I had a broken leg, crushed ankle, and a shattered tooth. I was in intensive care for about 3 weeks, and then they put me in, guess what? The cast from hell. By the time I was 11 years old, I had learned not to argue with cars anymore, but I was still frequently being infused. I averaged around 1 infusion a week during this time in my life, and this is most likely when I was exposed to the AIDS virus. This is a bump I had on my forehead, and this was one reason why I was being infused. I don't even remember how I got this bump, but you have to understand, when I was little, my sister you met there, they abused me. Everyone had to learn how to infuse me until I was old enough to infuse myself. They used to enjoy sticking me in, and they drew lots to see who could have the pleasure of doing it next. My mother most frequently did my infusions, and I liked her the best because she was good. She had the most practice, and she hardly ever missed a vein. This is Factor 8. It is a freeze-dried concentrate. It is expensive, but it is easy and fast to use. We liked it a lot better than some of the alternatives. We didn't know that each time I was infused with this product, I was getting the blood of around 20,000 different donors and had a very high risk of exposure to the AIDS virus. We had to keep careful records of my infusions because that was one way we could determine when I had been exposed to the AIDS virus. This is a Harold book and should have been named Henry. Harold was a hemophiliac who could do normal things because he used Factor 8. When I was little, I wanted to be just like Harold because he was normal. We used to read lots of things about hemophilia. We had all the Harold books. This is some light reading about hemophilia that my parents suggested my friends and teachers read. Now, before you met me or before I came here, you probably had all sorts of ideas and conceptions about how people with AIDS or AIDS patients live and what they look like. Well, I've had AIDS for over a year now and been infected for close to 9 years, and I'd like to show you a little bit about how I live and what I do. I swim, snorkel, scuba dive. I've hiked over 100 miles in the Grand Canyon in 100-degree heat with a 50-pound pack, where the nearest shower or cold drink was a 2-day hike away. AIDS patients can climb Mount Katahdin, the highest mountain in Maine, in 40-mile-an-hour winds. I have climbed on the Matterhorn in Switzerland. This is a very serious climb. Last year we tried to climb the Matterhorn. Many people die trying to climb this mountain, and by August of 1990, there had been over 14 fatalities that year alone. This is what the mountains looked like on the morning when we woke up. We had climbed above the clouds and had an ice storm at around 11,000 feet, and we could go no higher. It was an act of nature, not of AIDS, that prevented me from reaching the summit of the Matterhorn. We returned from the Matterhorn in September of 1990. 2 months later, I was diagnosed as having AIDS. Until the first week of March of this year, I never told anyone that I had AIDS. I never told my best friend, my girlfriend, my teachers, my relatives. I couldn't because I was afraid. If I had cancer or leukemia or any one of 100 other life-threatening illnesses, I could have told anyone. And except for support and sympathy, there would have been very little reaction. But AIDS is different. People are afraid of AIDS. People are afraid of AIDS patients. AIDS patients, we are afraid too. We are afraid of the public and private reaction to this disease. AIDS patients, like myself, often fail to seek treatment for fear of someone discovering the terrible secret that they have AIDS. So they will go untreated and will die unnecessarily. About 40,000 people with AIDS this year will develop a type of pneumonia called PCP. Between 2,000 and 12,000 of these people are going to die. This type of pneumonia is largely preventable if your doctor knows you are at risk. AIDS patients who are afraid to tell their doctors about their status are endangering their lives. AIDS patients, like me, often fail to seek the support and comfort of friends and family. They are afraid they might be rejected by someone they love or someone who loves them, so they will die alone without the love and support they need. Since I've gone public with my diagnosis, we have received thousands of letters from families across the country. Many families had very personal stories. One husband and wife never told anyone that their son died of AIDS. I know a 17-year-old boy who has not told his father he's HIV positive. AIDS is a very difficult burden for anyone to carry, and no one should ever have to carry that burden alone. But many people try and live with AIDS alone because they are unwilling to expose themselves and their families to the prejudice of a community that does not understand. While I am unwilling to remain silent, I did nothing to deserve this disease, and no one could ever deserve AIDS. There's no such thing as a guilty or an innocent victim. AIDS victims are all victims, and we are all victims of AIDS. I am not a danger to my community. AIDS is a very difficult disease to catch. There are only 3 ways you could get AIDS. You could be born to a mother who is infected, you could have unprotected sex with an infected person, or you could have direct blood-to-blood contact, such as through IV needles or blood products, with an infected person. Today, the fastest growing AIDS risk group is 16 to 25-year-olds. Many in my age group do not believe that AIDS is a problem for them. There's a dangerous sense of invulnerability, of immortality that I see in my classmates and peers. Most of us already are or will become sexually active. Some of us will experiment with alcohol and other drugs. Both put us at risk for AIDS. Anyone who's sexually active and practices unprotected sex is at risk for AIDS. Anyone who uses IV drugs is at risk for AIDS. No one deserves AIDS. No one should have to suffer from AIDS and the ignorance of friends, family, and community. My speaking project is not about AIDS. It's about compassion, understanding, and love. It is time we demystify AIDS as a disease. Knowledge will make the difference, and I need your help. There are lots of sources of information that are accurate about AIDS. You can contact the Red Cross or support groups for information. AIDS isn't a gay disease or a drug addict's disease. This most certainly isn't my disease. AIDS is our disease. As leaders in this and other communities, you have a responsibility to be sure that AIDS patients are treated appropriately. You have the power to help shape public opinions and attitudes. You can make people realize that AIDS jokes are not okay. Today in this country, there are over 180,000 AIDS patients. There are 1.5 to 2 million people who are infected with the virus, but who do not yet have AIDS. The public cost of treating these people will be billions of dollars. You have a responsibility to help others understand the risks of AIDS and the myths. You can't get AIDS from a drinking fountain or a soda bottle, or sharing food, or being in any normal routine activity with an AIDS patient. AIDS is not a threat to you or your families or your communities. Ignorance is. You have seen what I'm doing to fight AIDS. I can't do this alone. I've been treated with compassion, respect, and understanding everywhere I've gone, but this does not happen everywhere. AIDS patients in this country are still grossly discriminated against. Last month, a woman in Pennsylvania, where I was speaking, refused to speak from the same microphone that I used. Now, granted, it's an interesting shape, and I don't know what she was going to do with that microphone. No one has ever caught AIDS from a microphone. AIDS may not be dangerous, but that woman sure was. There are a lot of people who need to learn the facts about AIDS. There's a lot to do and a lot to learn, but there's very little time. If we're going to beat AIDS before AIDS beats us, it will take the combined effort of all of us. You not only need to change the way you think around AIDS patients and about AIDS patients, you need to change your behaviors and take responsibility for your actions. The number of people my age who are being infected with AIDS every year is doubling. Remember those statistics I quoted? 180,000 AIDS patients, 1.5 to 2 million people infected with the virus. I am part of that statistic. I do not want anyone I know or anyone I love to become part of that toll. Thousands of people will die from this disease. Please don't let yourself become one of them. If I am the first person with AIDS that you have ever met, you are lucky. I will not be the last. Thank you.
The
slide set.
remote was unplugged. Ask a question.
Now, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to try and answer them. And there's got to be some. I don't usually do that good a job. Come on.
Ask them about magic.
Well, if you're not going to ask me questions, I think I'll ask you a few. Most of you have probably heard about Magic Johnson. What do you think about that? Somebody want to tell me? Do you think the reaction would have been different if he was gay? I think people right now are overlooking the immorality as to who he is, and I think that's wrong. A lot of what he's doing and what has happened is because of who he is. If he had been a woman, he would have been branded slut and probably thrown out of town. If he had been gay, or if he had been an IV drug user, the reaction would have been totally different. And we feel that that is wrong. No matter who you are or how you are infected, should not make a difference. I don't feel it's exactly wrong, and it's unfortunate, though, that this has happened, and it's unfortunate that it took a professional basketball player for people to open their eyes and realize that AIDS is a problem. 118,000 people have died already, and it takes a basketball player for people to wake up. I can't help but to admit that some good will come of this, and I hope a lot of people take notice.
I have a question. When you first found out that you had AIDS, how did most of your friends, how did they react to that? Did most of them close you out? Embrace you a little better?
Well, When I first found out I was infected, I was 13 years old, and it was 1985. And at that point, that was around the same time the Ray brothers in Florida were having their house burned down. Ryan White was being forced out of schools. And this was not really, making us want to go public with this, so we kept it a secret. And until March of this year, we didn't tell anyone. When I told my friends, they were all very supportive. And since I found out when I was 13, I'd been very careful since then not to put anyone at risk of infection. So all my girlfriends, all my past girlfriends, knew that they were safe because I had done nothing to put them at risk. My friends were very supportive, as was my community. And about 40 close friends of mine said, "Henry, if anybody ever gives you a hard time, just let me know and I'll kill them for you."
Jennifer, let me ask you, how has Henry having contracted AIDS affected you with the rest of your family?
Well, this has been a long process. After we do these things, people come up and say, "My God, you're so composed. I can't believe you're living with this. Doctors have told you your brother probably isn't going to live more than a year or two, and you're talking about this calmly on a stage." But this is 6 years later. When we first found out Henry was infected, we were scared to death. It was 1985, and the only thing they could tell us was most of the people who are infected with this virus get AIDS. Almost everyone who gets AIDS dies pretty quick. Okay, I'm 17 years old, and my brother's going to die. Great. So I was so nice to him. I stayed home from school. I did his homework. I carried his books. I didn't go out on dates so I could spend quality time with him. Months this went on while I waited for him to die. And nothing happened. And as you can see, he's pretty obnoxious. So things got back to normal pretty quick.
Usually when I do these presentations at a college or a high school, and I'll be sitting here or further away from the audience, about 50 feet, and somebody in like the 4th or 5th row will say, "Is that a girl's class ring on your finger?" And they like search for these things. And yes, I do have a girlfriend. We've only been going out for about 4 months, but we've known each other pretty much since childhood. And every time I do these, there's always this swarm of people who want my address and phone number, directions to my house. So,
Obviously, it's not going to his head or anything.
no, actually, when I found that out, I wanted to go give her a big hug. When you're first infected, some of the symptoms are very minor. Fevers, rashes, small minor infections, swollen lymph nodes. Sort of it almost seems like a cold. And then the only minor symptoms usually show up 6 to 10 years later. The major symptoms, sorry, like pneumonia, things like that really usually diagnose you with having AIDS.
People who are further advanced, like Henry said, it's a process. You get infected, and then anywhere from 6 to 10 years later, the average person gets AIDS. In between that period, people, as they're starting to get sick and as their immune system starts to deteriorate, can experience rashes, fevers, night sweats, weight loss, diarrhea, fatigue, just feeling tired and worn out all the time. Again, it's sort of like a flu that doesn't go away. And then the symptoms gradually deteriorate as your immune system deteriorates, and then finally you get AIDS.
Right now, the medical field is making progress in a lot of areas. The problem with AIDS is usually I refer to it as sort of like a viral cockroach. And it changes so much, it's hard to find something that will always kill it in everybody. The virus changes so much, something that works today may not work tomorrow or may not work in someone else. So they're looking more for a long-term treatment than a cure. And they're hopefully going to improve the lifespans of people. And it's just a matter of finding the drug that works best for the strain of the virus you have.
Seeing as how you've been exposed to HIV and AIDS for a long
Keep in mind where you are, Henry.
Trying to think how I can put this. Some of the government's actions have been a little late, to say the least. Some of the things they do, like when they started screening the blood supply, could have been a lot more effective if implemented earlier. Part of the problem is when this epidemic first started, it was in the gay population. And a lot of people are like, well, it's only the gays and we don't really need them anyway. And they were sort of an undesirable part of society anyway. So people figured that this wasn't important. And when it could have been stopped early, no one did anything. And then after it spread to middle-aged tennis players, then people started to realize that this was going to be an epidemic.
Part of the problem we're about to have is that right now rates of transmission in the gay communities are going down. Basically everyone in the gay community knows someone who's died of AIDS and they're scared and they're getting their acts together. It's the rest of us who still think that this isn't going to happen to us. So what's happening is we're seeing cases in teenagers and young adults in their 20s doubling every year. There's twice as many as there were the year before. Because we all know that we're invulnerable and we don't have to worry about that because that's only gays or that's only blacks or that's only drug users. That's certainly not us nice normal people. So I think the government is starting to pay a lot of attention because a lot of people are starting to get infected.
Where do I find the strength? Usually when I do high schools or colleges, afterwards, as I said, I'm swarmed by people. And the odds are like about 40 to 1, and there's very few males, guys, who come up to me. So that's kind of comforting too. Not only that, I love the attention. And also, this helps us a lot because it makes us feel like we're doing something. And we just love to travel.
Right now, medically, there's not a lot we can do for Henry. There are only 2 drugs that are approved for treating HIV, and he's been on both of them, and neither of them work for Henry. We're trying to get him into an experimental drug protocol right now, but the doctors aren't incredibly optimistic. So this is about the only thing we can do, so we do it a lot.
How long does the virus live once it's outside the body?
Okay. We're very lucky with AIDS, and that's a weird thing to say, but it's true. There are a lot of viruses like flu viruses and cold viruses that can live on surfaces like countertops or utensils for long periods of time. And that's why probably so many of you are coughing in the audience. But AIDS isn't like that. HIV is a very weak virus. As soon as it dries out, it dies. And that's just left. You know, if you spilled blood, as soon as it dried on the stage, it'd be dead. If you put it in contact with something like Clorox, it is killed instantly. It's a very, very weak virus. And that's why the only ways to spread it are through sex and blood.
So far, there have only been 5 cases of someone being infected from a healthcare worker. All 5 cases were from the same dentist, and he was also said to be very lax in his procedures, like not wearing gloves, not cleaning his instruments, so it leads you to believe that this dentist was doing something fundamentally wrong. Basically, the way they were probably infected is through a cut or a sore in the mouth.
All 5 of the patients of the dentist you're referring to in Florida had oral surgery. So what CDC and some other people are speculating is that perhaps his instruments weren't properly cleaned. But as Henry said, we've had over 180,000 cases of AIDS in the United States, and 1 healthcare worker has ever been responsible for transmitting the virus.
So you say that Dr. Dennis had a sore and by him working in patient not about gloves?
If doctors follow universal precautions, patients will not be infected. The best thing you can do to protect yourself is when you go to your doctor or go to your dentist, make sure he wears gloves. Not only for your sake, but for his sake as well, because the dentists can pick up things from their patients and do far more often than they give things.
What about the other symptoms like yourself? You know, if you have a sore or something, you go to the sister, can she get infected by a sore that you have?
Not if I'm not having sex with them. No. New questions?
Do you
Do I ever stop and think about what's going on? No, I never think. This is always on my mind, and I know the facts, and I know the outlook is not good.
Tell me some great thing.
But getting depressed doesn't really help, or reacting badly, or getting upset, or being angry at someone doesn't help. So we try and turn our energies towards more constructive things.
You can tell this is an adult audience. We do this for all age groups, and when you talk to 7th graders, they ask the same question, only they phrase it a little differently. Henry, how long are you going to live? When do you die? So Henry has an answer for this one, too, which is most frequently termed in, what do you want to do before you die? And of course, again, 7th graders not knowing a whole lot about HIV and AIDS think this is going to be sometime next month, probably before Christmas, and are probably thinking in terms of going to Disney World as a treat. So, but Henry would be glad to tell you what he wants to do before he dies.
She loves to throw this in my face. The first time, as she said, I was asked this by a 7th grader, and I thought about it for a minute, and I don't know if I want to say it here, but ever since I've been a very small child, I've always wanted to be president. I know you have to be 35 to run for the presidency, so I figured it out in the year 2008. It's actually a presidential election year, and I'll be 35 in time for the elections. I'm going to run independent for the presidency. So if you're all around, vote Henry. Are there any more questions?
You speak to a lot of teenagers.
Yes, I speak to...
Are they really concerned? What feedback do you get from them? What are they asking?
Well, the feedback I get from teenagers is definitely interesting. Most of them know the facts. 97% of all college students who are sexually active know that a condom reduces the risk of transmission. Out of those who know that, only half of them actually use condoms because they don't believe it'll happen to them. This is a survey. These are actual numbers. People after my presentations have been asked, are you going to use condoms now? And some are like, no. We don't have to worry about AIDS here. This is upstate New York, or this is downstate, or... They just don't think that it's near them. A lot of people, it's like the girls who come up afterwards and ask me for dates, ask for directions to my house. One girl actually asked me if she could have my kids. Now, when somebody says that, you just want to like smack them and make them go through the presentation again. Sometimes it seems like they're not listening. They have to change their behavior, and that's very difficult for some people to do. But we're working on it. I didn't say it. Basically, what we try and say is we say abstinence is the best policy. That is the only thing that is 100% guaranteed. If you are going to have sex, please limit the number of partners and please make it safe for sex. Use a condom. That will reduce the risk, but it will not make anything perfectly safe. The only 100% guaranteed course of action is abstinence.
At the same time, we have to be realistic and realize that by the time they enter college, 80% of the students are sexually active. And if the only thing we're going to teach our children is abstinence, we're going to lose a lot of them.
Are there any other questions?
Oh, way over there, way over there.
I have two questions. First of all, is it a fact, has anyone ever lived from AIDS? I mean, who had AIDS and haven't died? And the second question is, when I was pregnant, most of the doctors, well, the doctors that I had, they believed that they should test the mother. And they asked, they asked me, it's not mandatory right now. I don't believe that if you want to take the
Yes. In answer to your 12-part question, first, has anyone ever had AIDS and lived? Well, AIDS doesn't really go away. I have AIDS, and I'm still alive as far as I know, and I plan on living a very long time. You can live with AIDS for any length of time. It's still a relatively new disease, so it's hard to say how long.
The average person who contracts AIDS lives between 1 and 2 years, although there have been cases of people making it 7 or 9.
And the second part of your question, after you are infected, it can take up to 6 months for the test to show the antibodies that they test for. So that'd be around 6 months you could potentially be infected and not even test positive, but still be able to infect other people. So if you feel you may have been exposed, or for your own peace of mind, we'd suggest you go back and get tested periodically every few months. How are my doctor's bill taken care of?
We rob convenience stores.
We're going to move up to 7-Elevens.
That's right. We were just joking, of course.
Right now I have insurance under my parents, and that is the only way I can get insurance. As soon as I am no longer dependent on them, I'm in deep trouble. Part of the problem with insurance companies and a lot of the healthcare profession itself is that they operate as a business. And a business is not there because they're nice people. They are there to make money. So no insurance company in their right mind is going to insure someone that they're going to lose money on. A lot of money. My medical bills are very expensive. My insurance pays for a fair amount of that. We have the AIDS Drug Assistance Program to take care of my medications, but a lot of people don't qualify for that. A lot of people they aren't sick enough, they don't actually have AIDS yet, and some of them just don't qualify or don't know about it.
Even with both of our parents working for hospitals and having probably the best health insurance we can possibly get, for that little jaunt in San Diego we had, our out-of-pocket expense will probably be $6,000 to $10,000 after the insurance covers what they're willing to pick up. My parents have remortgaged their house twice now. I think they're thinking of moving to Nebraska and building a log cabin at this point. There aren't a lot of options for a lot of people right now with the way insurance works.
Since you know some parents are afraid, or maybe they complain about the kids at school who might spread condoms, might distribute condoms, I want to know what your opinion is. Should we distribute condoms in the schools, or should we not distribute condoms in the schools to kids?
As for distributing condoms, it depends on the policy. A lot of people have said, we're not just going to stand in front of the door and hand them out, here's some condoms. We're going to make them available so you could get them if you wanted them. I don't feel that distributing condoms is going to promote sex, but I think it will promote safer sex. So yes, I am in favor of distributing condoms.
The other thing we need to do, though, is not just hand out condoms, like Henry said, and have kids be using them for water balloons. We need to educate children about what's going on, and the fact that, again, as this gentleman pointed out, it isn't 100%. There's no such thing as safe sex. It's safer. And let them understand the facts about AIDS. And I think that's about all the time we have, so...
Thanks a lot. Sorry to ask this, but I've always been curious. Who stood up first?
Henry, we certainly want to thank you for sharing your personal testament and experiences with us, and as well as the educational process that went along with that. I think we're all a lot more familiar with the situation with AIDS, and hopefully we will continue that learning process. As most of you are aware, yesterday was World AIDS Day, and today is National AIDS Day, and all federal agencies are in fact recognizing National AIDS Day today. Henry, on behalf of your sparing some time with us today, you certainly have now joined another family, and certainly we all appreciate your efforts, and we hope you will continue to spread that word. We would also like to thank Jennifer as well. And on behalf of your newfound family, we would like to present this small token of our appreciation. Thank you very much.
Oh, just rip it. Go on.
She's so impatient.
I'm older, I'm allowed.
It says, presented to Henry Nichols, an appreciation for speaking at our World AIDS Day on December 2nd, 1991, at the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
We would also like to thank Todd and Dana for spending some time with us as well, and the representatives from the various organizations I mentioned earlier. Also, last night on the news, the Whitman Walker Clinic, I think they had an extremely large candlelight service. I do recall seeing that, and it certainly was very, very impressive. Again, I would like to thank each and every one of you for participating in our program this morning. Remember our employee assistance program, which is available to any employee in the FBI, and the services are in fact strictly confidential, so please feel free to use the EAP at any time. Thank you all very, very much.
Oh, don't forget your card.
You've got a busy schedule today too, don't you? That's great. Jennifer, thank you very, very much.